That voice, flat and mechanical, was the last thing Sally Struthers expected to hear after 8 years of shared history. On screen, she and Rob Reiner were Michael and Gloria, the young couple who argued, laughed, and stood united against the world. To millions of viewers, their bond felt authentic, intimate, and unbreakable. Yet off-screen, that connection dissolved into distance, silence, and a single polite sentence that erased decades of familiarity. For years, audiences believed they knew the truth about this iconic television marriage. Letters poured in congratulating them, praising their chemistry, and celebrating what looked like real love. But what if the relationship America adored was only an illusion? What if the deepest part of that story was never meant for the audience at all? Only after Rob Reiner's death did Sally Struthers finally speak about the chapter she had kept hidden for more than 40 years. Not a scandal, not a betrayal, but something quieter and more painful. This is not a story about forbidden romance. It is a story about unspoken feelings, moral boundaries, and the damage silence can leave behind. A story about two people who once felt inseparable. When All in the Family began, Sally Struthers walked onto the set carrying more than lines and blocking marks. She arrived as a young actress, still trying to prove herself, eager to belong, eager to be chosen not just by the audience but by the world she was stepping into. The show quickly became more than a job to her. It was structure, stability, and a sense of emotional safety she did not yet have elsewhere in her life. Rob Reiner entered that same space from a different place entirely. To him, the set was not a refuge, it was a workshop. Even early on, he approached the show with a sharp awareness of rhythm, pacing, and audience reaction. He listened closely to the laughter, watched where it landed, and quietly learned how to shape moments for maximum impact. While Sally experienced the work through emotion and connection, Rob was already thinking beyond the stage lights toward control, authorship, and long-term direction. On screen, Michael and Gloria's relationship felt raw and immediate. They argued passionately, defended each other fiercely, and shared moments of genuine tenderness. The chemistry was undeniable, but beneath that chemistry were two very different emotional currents. Sally leaned into closeness. Rob leaned into purpose. Filming in front of a live audience intensified everything. Each laugh reinforced the bond they appeared to share. Each applause break validated the intimacy of their performances. For Sally, that reaction blurred the boundary between character and self. The warmth she felt on stage began to feel personal, reciprocal, and real. The show became her emotional center, and Rob, calm, focused, and constantly present, became part of that anchor. For Rob, the experience registered differently. He valued Sally as a scene partner and respected her instincts, but his attachment remained professional. He absorbed feedback, adjusted dialogue, and refined timing. Where Sally felt connection, Rob felt progress. Where she felt belonging, he felt momentum. To the audience, none of this was visible. Letters poured in, praising the love between Michael and Gloria, congratulating them as if they were married in real life. The public mistook emotional truth for emotional symmetry. What they could not see was that the same moments meant very different things to the two people creating them. And that imbalance, quiet, unspoken, and invisible, was present from the very beginning. The news of Rob Reiner's death did not arrive gently. It landed with weight, finality, and a sense of interruption, as if a conversation that had been paused decades earlier had suddenly been erased altogether. Hollywood responded the way it always does in moments like these, with tributes, retrospectives, and a careful celebration of legacy. Rob was remembered as a visionary director, a sharp political voice, and one of the creative forces behind some of the most enduring films of his generation. But for Sally Struthers, the loss carried a different meaning. While the public revisited Rob's career, Sally sat with something far quieter and far heavier, the realization that nothing more would ever be said between them. No clarification, no explanation, no chance to ask why a connection that once felt so natural had slowly turned into distance and silence. For more than 40 years, Sally had kept that chapter sealed, not because it was scandalous and not because it involved betrayal. She stayed silent, out of respect for Rob, for his family, and for the collective image they had created together. Speaking earlier would not have brought understanding. It would only have reopened wounds for people who never knew they existed. Only after Rob's death did that silence finally collapse. When Sally appeared before the press, her voice was steady, but the emotion beneath it was unmistakable. This was not an attempt to rewrite history or claim something that had never been offered. It was an acknowledgement of a truth that had lived quietly inside her for decades. A truth shaped by restraint, moral boundaries, and choices that were never discussed aloud. Death did not reveal new facts. It did not provide answers. Instead, it sealed every unanswered question in place. The moment Rob was gone, the possibility of understanding disappeared with him. And that finality forced Sally to confront what had haunted her for years, not the pain of rejection, but the pain of never knowing whether the silence that followed was necessary or simply easier. To understand what unfolded between Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner, it is necessary to return to the beginning, to 1971, when All in the Family was still finding its voice. The set was loud, experimental, and charged with creative tension. Everyone involved knew they were doing something new, something risky. But even within that shared uncertainty, Sally and Rob entered the space from very different emotional positions. Sally arrived hungry to prove herself. She was young, eager, and deeply aware that she was still earning her place not just on the show but in the industry. Each rehearsal mattered. Each reaction from the audience felt personal. She absorbed the environment, emotionally forming attachments not only to the work but to the people who made the set feel safe and familiar. For her, All in the Family quickly became more than a role. It became stability. Rob, though only in his early 20s, carried himself differently. He was observant, analytical, and already thinking beyond performance. During script readings, he listened closely to the rhythm of the dialogue and the timing of the laughs. He paid attention to what landed and what didn't. On several occasions, he would suggest cutting a line or allowing a pause to stretch, letting the audience's reaction do the work instead of the script. These weren't power plays. They were instincts. Norman Lear noticed. While others focused on delivery, Rob focused on structure. Lear trusted that instinct and gave Rob room to speak up creatively. Slowly, almost invisibly, Rob began stepping into the role of a decision-maker. He was still acting, but he was also learning how to shape a show from the inside. Sally saw this brilliance and admired it. She felt understood professionally and energized by the exchange of ideas. But where Rob experienced creative momentum, Sally experienced emotional connection. She read their collaboration as mutual closeness. He read it as effective partnership. This was the imbalance that no one named. While Sally bonded through shared moments, Rob bonded through shared objectives. She attached meaning to the time they spent talking between takes, laughing after scenes, and navigating pressure together. He attached meaning to growth, mastery, and long-term vision. They were standing side by side, but looking in slightly different directions. Filming in front of a live audience amplified this divide. Every laugh reinforced Sally's sense of intimacy. Every successful adjustment reinforced Rob's sense of control. Neither was wrong, but the gap between them widened quietly, without conflict, without warning. From the outside, they looked perfectly aligned. Inside the process, however, two separate emotional trajectories were already forming, one rooted in feeling, the other in forward motion. And once that imbalance took hold, it would shape everything that followed. As the seasons progressed, the rhythm of All in the Family began to shape not only the show, but the inner lives of the people making it. Filmed week after week in front of a live audience, the series created an environment where emotion was constantly reinforced. Laughter arrived immediately. Applause confirmed connection. Silence signaled tension. Nothing was abstract. Everything was felt in real time. For Sally Struthers, this atmosphere blurred boundaries. Each performance ended not with a quiet cut, but with hundreds of voices responding to her in unison. The audience didn't just watch Gloria's marriage unfold, they reacted to it, validated it, and emotionally participated in it. Over time, that response became inseparable from Sally's own sense of belonging. The set felt alive, protective, and familiar. It felt like home. Rob Reiner experienced the same environment but filtered it differently. He paid attention to how the audience shaped scenes, not how it shaped him. He observed where laughter peaked, where it faded, and how subtle changes could shift the energy of a moment. To him, the live audience was not emotional reinforcement, it was information. Between takes, Sally and Rob laughed, shared private jokes, and navigated pressure together. They understood each other's timing instinctively. Their scenes felt effortless. To Sally, that ease suggested something rare and personal. To Rob, it confirmed professional compatibility. The same moments carried two different meanings. This was the danger of false intimacy. When emotional intensity is repeated weekly, it begins to feel permanent. The character's closeness seeps into real interactions. The audience's belief amplifies it further. For Sally, the distinction between Gloria's devotion and her own feelings became increasingly difficult to separate. The show offered stability during a time when her personal life felt uncertain. The people on set became her emotional center. Rob, however, remained anchored to structure. He valued Sally deeply as a collaborator, but he did not confuse that closeness with something undefined or romantic. Where Sally felt emotional safety, Rob felt professional trust. Where she felt connection, he felt alignment. Neither perspective was dishonest. But the environment rewarded intensity, not clarity. It encouraged emotional projection without demanding emotional definition. No one stopped to ask what those shared moments meant, or whether they meant the same thing to both people involved. From the outside, the chemistry looked undeniable. Inside, it was quietly becoming unsustainable. The intimacy that fueled the performances was drifting beyond the boundaries of the script, setting the stage for a moment neither of them could avoid much longer. There was never a grand build-up, no dramatic confrontation, no moment designed for spectacle. What happened between Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner unfolded quietly, almost cautiously, as if both sensed the weight of what stood at the edge of that conversation. For Sally, the feeling had been growing silently for years, shaped by proximity, shared pressure, and the illusion of mutual understanding. Eventually, the effort to keep it contained became heavier than the risk of speaking. One afternoon, after filming had wrapped and the noise of the set had faded, Sally approached Rob away from the others. Her voice was low, controlled, and unmistakably sincere. She suggested stepping away from the crowd just for a moment. Not to create drama. Not to make demands. Simply to talk. It was the clearest invitation she had ever made, an attempt to understand whether what she felt existed beyond her own experience. Rob's reaction was immediate and restrained. He did not raise his voice. He did not express anger or discomfort. Instead, he drew a line, clean, deliberate, and unmovable. He reminded her that she had a husband. He reminded her that he had a wife. Whatever connection existed between them, he said, belonged strictly within the boundaries of their work. There was no room for interpretation. There was no opening left unexplained. To Rob, this was an act of integrity. He believed in dignity in protecting his marriage and in refusing to let emotional closeness drift into moral ambiguity. From his perspective, the clarity of refusal was the most responsible choice available. He did not accuse Sally. He did not shame her. He simply closed the door. For Sally, the effect was devastating. The rejection itself was painful, but what cut deeper was its precision. There was no softness to lean on, no confusion to reinterpret later. The boundary was absolute. In that moment, every shared laugh, every look exchanged across the stage collapsed into silence. She turned away, carrying a humiliation she would never speak of again. And she didn't. Sally told no one. Not the cast members she trusted most. Not Gene Stapleton. Not Carol O'Connor. The experience remained entirely hers, sealed behind professionalism and forced composure. The show went on. Scenes were rehearsed. Laughter continued. But something fundamental had shifted. Rob treated the moment as resolved. The line had been drawn, and in his mind, that was enough. He returned to work, maintaining distance where closeness had once existed, convinced that clarity had prevented harm. Sally returned to the stage, carrying a secret that reshaped everything. Each scene required her to stand beside the man she had trusted, with her feelings now bound by an unspoken agreement never to acknowledge what had happened. The tragedy was not that Rob said no. It was that once the line was drawn, nothing was ever said again. After that moment, nothing was discussed, yet everything had changed. Sally returned to the set each day carrying a weight no one could see. She still performed. She still laughed on cue. She still played Gloria with warmth and conviction. But beneath the surface, the ease that once existed between her and Rob was gone, replaced by a careful distance that never needed to be named. Rob behaved as though the matter had been settled. In his mind, the boundary had protected everyone involved. He did not revisit the conversation, and he did not offer reassurance. He managed the situation the same way he managed discomfort in general, by creating space. Where closeness had once felt natural, restraint now felt necessary. Sally felt that shift immediately. Every glance on stage, every shared scene carried a quiet tension. She learned to redirect her emotions into her performance, allowing Gloria's vulnerability to absorb what she could not express as herself. The audience never noticed. The laughter continued. The illusion remained intact. Then came the complication Sally had never anticipated. One afternoon, Rob pulled her aside, his tone serious and controlled. He explained that his wife Penny Marshall would be attending the taping that evening as she often did, but this time he asked something different of Sally. When Penny arrived, he said Sally should not approach her. No greeting, no conversation, no familiarity. The reason was clear. Penny believed there was something between them. The accusation stunned Sally. She had never crossed the line Rob himself had drawn so firmly years earlier. To her, whatever feelings once existed had been buried and disciplined into silence. But Rob insisted the precaution was necessary. He loved his wife, he said, and he needed to protect his marriage from misunderstanding. Sally complied. That night, she kept her distance as instructed. Penny looked at her with suspicion, offering no warmth in return. Sally stood on the edge of a situation she had never created, excluded from a space that had once felt safe. The pain was not jealousy, it was erasure. In that moment, Sally understood something crucial. Silence did not dissolve emotion, it redistributed it. The unspoken began to press outward, affecting people who had never been part of the original conversation. What had started as a private boundary now reshaped every interaction around it. And still no one spoke. By the late 1970 seconds, All in the Family was no longer just evolving creatively, it was approaching an ending. Storylines shifted, characters changed, and the sense of permanence that once defined the set began to fade. On screen, Michael and Gloria's marriage fractured. Their divorce was written as a reflection of changing times, an honest portrayal of relationships that did not always survive idealism. Off-screen, the timing felt painfully symbolic. As the show came to a close, Rob Reiner withdrew almost completely. The easy familiarity that had once filled the space between takes disappeared without explanation. Calls stopped, conversations shortened. What had once felt like shared ground quietly vanished. For Sally, the change was abrupt and disorienting. There was no argument, no falling out, only absence. At the same time, Sally's personal life was unraveling. She had recently gone through a divorce of her own, leaving her emotionally exposed at the very moment the show that had anchored her life was ending. All in the Family had been more than steady work. It had been routine connection and a sense of belonging. When it ended, she lost not only a role, but the emotional structure built around it. Sally continued to portray Gloria in a spin-off series, now as a single mother. The irony was impossible to ignore. On screen, she navigated separation and independence. Off-screen, she was doing the same without the support system that had once surrounded her. Rob moved forward, new projects, new opportunities, and a widening distance from the world they had shared. Sally stayed behind with memories that had nowhere to go. The hardest part was not rejection, it was disappearance. The sense that someone who had once been present in her daily life had quietly stepped out of it, leaving no explanation behind. When the show ended, the illusion dissolved. What remained was a silence that finally felt permanent. As the years passed, Rob Reiner's career entered a new phase. He transitioned fully into directing, earning acclaim and authority with each project. His name became synonymous with intelligence, control, and creative confidence. To the industry, he appeared exactly as expected, focused, disciplined, and forward-moving. Sally Struthers watched this transformation from a distance. Occasionally, Rob would call. The calls were brief and oddly specific. He would launch straight into a joke, finish the punchline, and hang up without greeting or follow-up. There was no conversation, no explanation, no invitation to reconnect. Just a fleeting reminder of a familiarity that no longer existed. To Sally, those calls felt like small flashes of light, unexpected, momentary, and gone before she could reach for them. Then one day, even those calls stopped. Years later, in 2003, Sally encountered Rob again at the premiere of The Producers. Seeing him across the room stirred memories she had carried quietly for decades. Acting on instinct rather than intention, she called out to him using the name she associated with their shared youth, Robbie. He turned, extended his hand, and offered a polite professional smile. "Hello, Sally. Nice to see you." The words landed with finality. There was no warmth behind them, no trace of recognition beyond social courtesy. In that instant, Sally understood that whatever bond they once shared had been deliberately sealed away. The distance was no longer circumstantial, it was chosen. After that night, Sally made a decision. If she saw Rob approaching from across a room, she would step aside, slip into an alley, or remove herself entirely. It was not avoidance, born of bitterness. It was self-preservation. Some connections, once reduced to formality, are too painful to revisit. And sometimes, the only way to protect what remains of a memory is to stop testing whether it still exists. Time did not soften the distance between them. It only made it quieter. Years after their last encounter, Sally Struthers stood on a stage honoring Norman Lear, the man who had brought them together. Rob Reiner spoke with grace, acknowledging the television family they once shared. For a brief moment, Sally glimpsed the version of him she remembered, thoughtful, articulate, generous. The recognition felt sincere. It also felt late. By then, nothing needed resolution. The story had already settled into its final shape. Rob's death did not create the pain. It confirmed it. It ended the possibility of asking why closeness became distance, or whether silence was necessary or simply convenient. What remained was not anger, but the ache of an unfinished connection. This is not a story about a romance that never happened. It is a story about boundaries, timing, and the quiet damage left when people choose not to speak. About how professional respect can coexist with emotional loss. About how two people can stand side by side for years, yet walk away carrying different memories. How many relationships fade this way, not through conflict, but through avoidance? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and share thoughts.